So I understand what I'm going to God. I want to have an understanding what I'm asking for. Am I entirely ready to have these? Am I really? All of them? Everything? I think so. It's hard to say for sure, isn't it? But I better do the work to at least get to the point where I can say, I'm not giving it lip service. I've really thought about it. Doesn't mean I have to be perfect, but I've thought about it. Now I'm done with my 6th step. Now the 7th step comes in, and it seems so simple. I mean, we're on page 76 in the big book, and we're literally 2 paragraphs. We're going to cover 2 steps. And these 2 steps trip up a lot of people because of this. When ready, we say something like this. And here's the 7-step prayer. My Creator, I am now willing that you have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen. We have then completed step 7. Now, that would be terrific if you do that prayer and you understand every word in that prayer and you really want to fulfill the contractual obligation of that prayer. That's terrific. Most of us have to revisit it over and over again. And I certainly have. The 7th step, when I first took it early in my recovery, was very different than when I took it at 2 years and 4 years and 6 years and 8 years and every couple of years when I go through the steps, and it keeps changing because what happens is my life changes. I learn more about myself. I become more effective. My life gets bigger. My capacity to love gets bigger. My capacity to serve gets bigger. My capacity for resentment gets bigger. Everything gets bigger. Don't think the bad stuff doesn't grow too, you know. My ego keeps step with everything. I mean, hey, look, my recovery will always be in a race with my alcoholism. Always. You know, they fired the starter's pistol 16 years ago. My recovery's been just ahead of it, you know what I mean? Sometimes I feel like I've got a good lead, and then it catches up a little bit. But I don't kid myself that my alcoholism wants, you know, it's not leaving. I got off the train just didn't leave the station. It's just sitting there idling. I mean, I understand that. But I have to revisit these things. But when I talk about the contractual element of the 7-step prayer, and a lot of people go, contractual element? Well, you know, I'm asking for something. I'm asking that you're going to take all of me, God, good and bad. You're going to take every one of my defects. Take them. That's asking a lot, in my opinion. I got a lot of them. And I'm going to give them to you. But I'm going to do something too, because I understand the nature of this. This prayer lets me know we're in this together, that I have a new purpose in life. Isn't that great? I have a new purpose. I'm going to ask God to give me strength because I can't do what I need to do without it. But if you give me strength from this point forward, I'll serve. I will serve. I will serve you, and I will serve your kids to the best of my ability on a daily basis if you grant me strength as we go out from here. What do you say? Well, God always says yes. In my experience, he always says yes. But the important thing about that 7th step is there's nothing in there about my selfishness. There's nothing in that 7th step that's going to play into my selfishness. I mean, I looked for it. It's just not there. I mean, I like the idea that he's going to remove every single defect of character. Now, how would I want every single defect of character removed, and why? So I look good, so I'm more effective at work and make more money, so people like me more. You know, that's why I want my defects of character removed. It doesn't say anything about that. It says that he's going to remove the ones that stand in the way of the usefulness. If you've been here a while, you may have gone through what I've gone through. I've been curious why I've been left with some of the character defects I've been left with. I mean, I have certain aspects of my personality that I wish, to be honest with you, I wish I didn't have. You know, I can be a little gruff, but I'll tell you what, I show up like grim death in my life, you know. I mean, I show up. I show up at work. I show up in AA, you know, and that's part of my personality, you know. I'm not flashy, but I'm steady. You know, I wish I was flashier. I wish I wasn't so sensitive. But I don't know, maybe my sensitivity is useful to God because it makes me see things that other people don't see and feel things other people don't feel. So I am more inclined to help because I just can't stand in a sober state seeing some of the things I see. So maybe the sensitivity is a good thing in God's eyes. You see, the beauty of the 7th step is it's none of my business anymore. I don't get to go in there and say, I want you to have all of me, good and bad, but here's a list. And I'd prefer if you look at the way it's numbered, and if we could work on the ones at the top of the list working down, because I've got lust way down there. We don't need to get to that right away. So I ask for these things that are going to help me. It's going to help me. I'm going to get rid of my defects of character. I'm going to give them to God. There's a guy I used to go to meetings with, and a good friend of mine, and we've had this argument about the 7-step for years because he says something that just makes me batshit crazy, but it sounds good. It sounds good. It's one of those things in recovery, and I told him this. I go, I'm going to talk about you, man, and whenever I get a chance and get feedback, because maybe I'm wrong, so give me feedback on this because I am open-minded to that, really. And he says that when he takes his guys to the 7-step, when he finishes the 7-step prayer, he tells his guys, it's no longer your job to work on you. It's none of your business anymore. And I go, well, you know why they wrote the 12 and 12? And so Bill could really spend a little bit more time getting into these steps and really clearing up some misconceptions about them that he didn't understand were going to come up when he originally wrote them. And one of them was the 7-step. Because people got the idea that they said this prayer, and now it was God's business. So you're acting the way you used to act. I guess the 7-step's not working for me. I guess God hasn't decided it's time to remove this from me. But if you read the 12 and 12 and you read the way that Bill talks about it, Bill is very clear that we don't have the power to do anything about these defects of character. But we are absolutely the stewards of them. We are absolutely the monitors. What format do we use as members of Alcoholics Anonymous to keep an eye on our character defects? 10th and 11th step inventory processes. That's our format. If we're not on a daily basis doing a 10th and 11th step inventory process so we can look for these character defects that we've asked God to remove, then we're not taking responsibility for our part in it. God will do for us what we cannot do for ourselves. He will never do for us what we can do for ourselves. Why it's good to call upon the gods, a man himself should lend a hand. And somebody said that in about 450 BC, as a matter of fact, so these thoughts go back a long way. Is that in the 7th step, it is our business. We do not have the power to do anything about it, but we are the police. We are the ones that are supposed to be men in sobriety trying to grow through a spiritual life. And we have to start getting a different idea about values. I mean, I can be proud of myself that I don't cheat on my wife, but am I really not cheating on my wife if I'm downstairs in the family room looking at pornography while she's upstairs asleep? There's a question for you. That's something I had to deal with in my sobriety. You know, when I was talking about infidelity. And I've never cheated on my wife. And I had a sponsor ask me a few questions. I went, oh, well, maybe I have. You know, I had to look at some of these things. How do you find these things out? 10-step work. How do you know what a character defect is? You do the 10-step and the 11-step work, and it becomes available to you. The wonderful thing about the 7-step is in the 3rd step, I've come to God with a very limited understanding. I've walked in there and I've said, I don't really know what's going on. I'm newly sober. I'm pretty sure that what I bring to the game will just get me dead. I'm going to turn my thinking and my actions over to you because my sponsor says to. And I don't even know if you're real, but please help me because I don't want to die and I don't want to hurt no more. Amen. And, now, a lot's happened between 3 and 7. It's interesting, at the end of the 3rd step, it doesn't say amen. At the end of the 7th step, it does. It's completed thought. Because I really think the 7-step prayer is a completion of the 3rd step prayer. They go together in a lot of ways. That's just me. I think that I can't find it in literature, so it's just an opinion. But in the 7th step, think about what's happened. 4 and 5, huge chunks of truth about ourselves, huge humility, shared it with God and another human being. We're open. The veil's off. Here I am. I mean, 6th step, we've looked at these things. We really understand what's wrong with us. We've got that self-knowledge, and we know that's going to kill us by itself. So we're entirely ready. We're ready to take the next step. We're ready to go do the work. And in the 7th step, we go, and we're ready now. We understand what we're up against. We thought we knew the monster when we did the 3rd step. But all we knew was unmanageability and some war stories. We got down to causes and conditions in 4 and 5. We see the underlying causes. We see the rat bastard with no good lighting. And we're scared, again, which is good. We go to God in a real honest manner. Say, take all of me, Dad. Take it all, and I'll serve you. All right, let's have lunch. Thanks. I think you were a politician. I'm Don. I'm an alcoholic. Morning, gentlemen. Having a great retreat myself. I hope everybody's having a good time. I want to tell you we had a lot of fun yesterday in the afternoon. We went out to take a look at the falls, and we did that, and we went out to Clear Lake, and it was wonderful, and had a nice piece of pie and a cup of coffee and a nice conversation. And then we went out and looked at the gardens there that were beautiful, and there was a wedding going on, and we peeked over the rock wall and watched these knuckleheads getting married and tried to warn them, and they did it anyway. And so young and so in love, so ignorant, you know. And then the highlight of the trip is on the way out. We're minding our own business, and it's Cress, and it's Bob, and it's Don, and we're just four spiritual guys out in nature, and these three middle-aged women tried to pick us up. We were just aghast, you know, and I came up to Bob and said, "Hey, big boy, what are you up to?" And asked him if he knew where to get any vodka. So being spiritual and of service, he goes, "Well, I think if you go to the store down there." And it was great, you know, and they just kept pressing, you know, where are you guys staying? Well, we're over at St. Benedict's. Well, what are you, pastors? Or no, God, we're not pastors. And well, you know, what are you doing? I mean, you're not drinking? No, we don't drink. Well, what kind of religion do you belong to that you don't drink? And they're just aghast, and they're pressing and they're pressing and they're pressing. They just want to know. So finally, Cress can't take it anymore, and he goes, "I'm an alcoholic and I don't drink." And everything changed. They were not looking for a good time any longer. They were looking for an exit. They were mortified. But we had a lot of fun with them. Actually, I told them we were part of the new priesthood. I said we're not very moral, but the kids are safe. But they were interested. You know, one was more interested than all the others. Really kept asking questions. He pulls me aside. She goes, "Well, how long has it been since you drank?" It's an interesting question to ask if you're looking for an exit, isn't it? So you never know. God works in mysterious ways, so who knows? Maybe we had a 13-step call that turned into a 12-step call. You know, you never know. Well, up to this point, going through these steps, we finished off on step 9, and keeping in mind that the first 3 steps are going to get us ready to turn our lives over to God. And then steps 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 show us how we turn our lives over to God. And what we're going to go through today is steps 10, 11, and 12, which show us how we can indefinitely turn our lives over to God. And that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to take a break at 10:15, and then we'll pick it up again at 10:30. We're going to start with steps 10 and 11. I'm going to kind of jump back and forth in, but hopefully we'll be able to follow with that. Step 10, continue to take personal inventory. And when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. Principle there at play is maintenance. And okay. Oh, you know what? I'm out of order here. We're starting on step 8. I apologize. You just going to let me do that, guys? Thanks. Oh, look at the poor bastard. He's going to be embarrassed later. Oh, yeah. I really like the way we treat each other when we're up here at St. Benedict's. You know what? Now I feel at home. This is AA. This is the AA I know and love. I was reading, I'm like, why do I feel like I'm ahead of myself? Okay. We're going to start at step 8. Made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. The principle here is willingness. And, step 8 at first glance, because it doesn't get a lot of play in the book, and you think, how tough can it be to make a list? And the real kicker in step 8 is the willingness. Because it's one thing to make a list. Anybody can make a list, but it's what's on that list and what you're going to have to do with it that we need to reflect. And I think some of us, when we make the list, don't take the time to spiritual preparedness And I certainly didn't when I made my first 8-step list. If I had understood the implications, maybe I wouldn't have been as thorough on it. So maybe that's not a bad thing. I hear it kicked around in AA, and a lot. My first sponsor, really told me not to worry too much about it. He goes, you're on this step, make the list. And we get directions in the big book on how to do this. And it starts on page 77. I'm sorry, page 76. Now we need more action, without which we find faith without works is dead. Now let's look at steps 8 and 9. We have made a list of all persons we harmed and whom we are willing to make amends. We made it when we took inventory. So if you burned your inventory, you're probably going to have to get a forensics team and go figure out where you're at. We subjected ourselves to a drastic self-appraisal. Now we go out to our fellows and repair the damage done in the past. We attempt to sweep away the debris that has accumulated out of our effort to run on self-will and run the show ourselves. If we haven't the will to do this, we ask until it comes. Remember, it was agreed at the beginning we would go to any length for victory over alcohol. So the willingness for me to go out to make my list was one thing. To be willing to go ahead and start taking action in step 9. Once again, I'm going to use my self-centeredness to propel myself. I don't want to die a horrible alcoholic death. Remembering that at the beginning, it was agreed that I would go to any length for victory over alcohol. That's why I think it's so important that we get through these steps as soon as possible, keeping in mind that pain has no memory. And there's nothing worse than working with somebody who hasn't made their amends, and you know what it's like if they've got 3-4 years sobriety under their belt and they've done an inventory and they really haven't done 6 and 7 and they've never made any amends, and the desperation is gone. They've taken a long walk away from that last drink, the memory of that suffering and humiliation that the book talks about, that it's sometimes we're unable to bring into our consciousness with any kind of sufficient force. That's in play. And we can fool ourselves that because we haven't physically ingested alcohol and because we're going to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, that we're not in dangerous ground. But as we go through the book and as we get into step 10, what we're going to find out is we're not in that position of neutrality until we start making these amends and taking inventory on a daily basis. And it's very hard to convince somebody of that if they feel good and they got the job back and they got the girl back. And it's something that we have to overcome as sponsors of men, that we keep people in the process. Because the fruit will always be there if the labor is put forth. But sometimes it's a lot easier if you got a guy that's new and he's desperate and he remembers right where he came from and he's still in touch with that stuff to go and make these amends. Because it's a difficult proposition. Because isn't saying you're sorry enough? Isn't saying a solitary apology with God going, God, I'm really sorry about the way I've lived my life, but I'm not going to do it again. Why would you want to go back and dredge up those old hard feelings? What good could that be for anybody? And those kind of feelings I certainly had when I thought about having to make these amends. Page 77 talks about why we make these amends. At the moment, we are trying to put our lives in order, but this is not an end in itself. Our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be a maximum service to God and the people about us. Once again, we suffer from an element that only a spiritual awakening can overcome. We need to have a conscious contact with God for that to occur. What we have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of that spiritual condition. These things cut us off from God. We are trying to put our life in order. Some of us come in, like myself, with a lot of societal problems, and we have to clean up our lives. We have to do a lot of work sometimes just to get to the starting point in life. But that's not why we're doing it. We're doing it to fit ourselves to be a maximum service to God and the people about us, and we can't do that if there's things between us, God, and his kids. So we need to understand that why we're doing this and why it's so vital and why we're not going to overcome drinking or have any kind of true contentment in sobriety if we haven't made a strenuous effort to clean up the things that have been blocking us from him and from his kids. It's hard to walk a spiritual life when you're walking with a past that you're not proud of, that wasn't based in a spiritual way of life, but you're walking with it every day. And it makes it tough because there's nothing worse in Alcoholics Anonymous than to stay around here a little while and learn to talk but not be able to walk the walk and feel like a spiritual phony and know that you really don't have a conscious contact and you don't really know what they're talking about. and knowing that you still having those feelings of remorse and guilt. And I remember one time I was in the amends process, and there was one amends I was pretty sure I wasn't going to make, and it was to a former employer, and I'd worked for this guy for like 8 years at this big company, and he had been great to me. He had been like a father to me. He'd been terrific. And I had done nothing but take advantage of this guy and steal from his company in terms of not giving a good effort for the money that he paid me, and just had been a real disappointment in the guy. And when I thought of him, I cringed in sobriety. You know, I cringed at the way that I treated this kind man who had done me so well. And I didn't know how I was ever going to be able to go to him and try to make this right. And I remember I was in a big shopping mall in Southern California. I was just over a year sober, and I'm walking through there. And I wear glasses, as you've seen. I didn't have my glasses on, and about 30 yards away, I could have sworn I saw him. And I saw this guy, and I knew it was this guy. And I didn't say, oh, here's my opportunity to make amends. I literally dashed into a store to the left. And I was in that store, and my heart was beating. And I remember feeling a fear that I had only experienced when I was a small child. You know, when you're scared of something in the dark, and you have a bad dream, and it felt just like that. And I realized that I had to make these amends, and I had to make that amend, that I didn't want to live that way in sobriety. And it was a powerful indication to me on just how powerful that still had a hold over me, the remorse I was feeling about the way I lived, and that I could stack up all the good action that I wanted over on this side of the ledger, that I could live a seemingly principled and sober and good life on this side of the ledger, but unless I went back over to this side and took responsibility and stood up as a man for the first time in my life, put my head and shoulders above that hedge and let them see me, and came to them in a spirit of helpfulness, I wasn't going to get the gift of this program. And I knew it, and that experience showed me that. The terror it instantly produced within me, just seeing somebody that was on my list that I wasn't sure. And I realized at that point I wasn't willing to make that amends, and I had to start praying about that individual to be able to go and do that. There's very specific instructions about the attitude that we have to bring into the amends process. There's a word associated with the amends. It's in 2 different places in the big book that was very important for me when I made my amends. And that word is demonstration. The first place it's used in the big book is it says that when we go to a person, we have to be careful that we don't necessarily talk about our, spiritual discoveries. That we don't want to walk into an amends process with somebody that we, in my case, I might have lived like a scumbag and roared through their life. But now I got religion. So it's all better now. That might actually cut me off from the process. That the man that I go to will be more interested in a demonstration of goodwill than my talk of spiritual discoveries. And then later on in the book, he uses the word again, and it uses the word, and if not all my amends are going to go well. And it says it shouldn't matter if somebody throws me out of their office because I've made my demonstration. It's water over the dam. Now, the book also promises me on 9 out of 10 occasions the unexpected thing's going to happen. That most people that you go to in a humble attitude with a sincere desire to make these things right, and I emphasize sincere, that they will sense that. I don't know if they'll even intellectually understand it, because I've walked in, I've made appointments and met with people that I haven't talked to in 20 years when I was making my amends. And when we left, we weren't doing well. We didn't have a good relationship. And they weren't happy when they saw me. They had that tension on their face and that uncomfortability that said, what's all this about? And I explained to them what had happened in my life and why I was there in very clear terms. And I followed the suggestions in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous through sponsored direction. And I had a sponsor that really believed in talking about your amends before you made it. He wanted to be very clear on what my intent was. He wasn't worried about the words so much as my motives and my intent to make this amends. And one thing that he always held up to the light was the real purpose of the amends. He let me understand that it really didn't matter what would happen, that I didn't have any control over how this was going to go. That I'd be making a demonstration. But the one thing I could be assured of is it would bring me closer to God, and it would ensure that I would be able to stay sober if I didn't shirk at this part of the process. And he wanted me to understand that, and that gave me a lot of faith that I could go in and right on top of everything, I didn't really care what happened. I really wanted it to work out from an ego-based standpoint, from an emotional standpoint, but more importantly, I wanted to stay sober and be able to say that I had worked this process. In my story, what I realized when I did my inventory, I found out some things about myself. And one of the things I found out is I'd never given anything in life 100%, ever. And I wondered why that was. And as I dug deeper in my inventory and did the work, some patterns emerged. And what emerged for me is there's a problem with a guy like me who doesn't feel naturally like he's enough. It's your greatest fear in the world that other people might see that. And there's a strange comfort in going through life and only giving 65, 70, 75% at any endeavor, or only 100% in short bursts, short intervals. And the comfort in that is if you don't make the grade, if you fail, in a strange way you can comfort yourself by saying, well, I really didn't apply myself. I really didn't give it everything I had. You know, I didn't study for that test. I didn't really put a lot of energy into that relationship. I'm not surprised it failed. You know, I could have got that promotion at work, but I wasn't willing to play their games. All these things that we justify and rationalize, when the truth is we've held back our God-given gifts because of fear, self-centered fear. And I realized that I could do the same thing with these steps. I could pick and choose what I was going to do. I could pick and choose what I disclosed to a sponsor. I could pick and choose what amends I was going to make because of self-centered fear. And I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to be the guy who was drunk again, sitting back going, I can't blame AA. I did it again. I do this in everything in my life. I show up with the best intentions. I find an answer. I recognize it as an answer. I recognize it as a good thing. And then I pull back on the reins. Why do I do that? And you see, I don't have the power to change on my own. I don't have the power to make these amends on my own. I have to have God's help. I have to have constant contact with my Creator, with my sponsor, and spiritually get some armor on, because it's not going to remove my fear. What removes my fear is walking through that process with that fear, hand in hand, driving to those appointments, showing up at those family members' homes, with my heart racing in my chest, thinking about everything I did, completely in touch with who the animal was that lived that way, and having a sincere desire, because I've come to know God better through the preceding steps, that I don't want to let God down. What a change. What a change that we don't want to let God down as we go through this amends process. Looking my whole life for something bigger than myself that I could believe in, and I found it in Alcoholics Anonymous and the God of my own understanding. And I go into these amends wanting to be closer to God and not wanting to let Him down, not wanting to give this thing 65%. We go to Him in a helpful and forgiving spirit, confessing our former ill feelings and expressing our regret. The process in the book gives a lot of suggestions and a lot of different examples of different amends we might make. In step 9, it says we're going to make these direct amends, except when to do so would injure them or others. I don't know if anybody else, when they went through this process for the first time, explained to our sponsors with all sincerity, we might be the others. You don't understand, if I make this amends, I might go to jail. You don't understand, if I make this amends, it might cause problems in other areas of my life. And that's where a sponsor really, really helps you separate that stuff. Because I never know when my fear is going to temper my story and try to get me out of doing the work that I need to do in these areas. But if I'm honest with my sponsor, completely disclosing, he will tell me which amends I need to make and how to make them. Because sometimes we make the amends, but we may not disclose everything that we know about the situation, because that would injure somebody else. And we don't have the right, the book says, to save our own skin at the expense of somebody else. I don't get to go in and go to a former girlfriend and let her know, you know what, we were together for 2 years, and I got to tell you, I cheated on you the entire time. That would be devastating. I've already hurt the girl. Now I'm going to go in and just kill her. And I was taught to go into that situation and talk about my behavior in it, and talk in a general way like we learned to share in Alcoholics Anonymous. I wasn't the best boyfriend in the world. You were nothing but good to me. You were kind to me. You wanted this thing to work out. You took an interest in my life and my career. And I treated all those gifts that you gave me, and I swatted them away. And I got to tell you, that had nothing to do with you. It had to do with me being a very sick man, and I am so sorry. And if I could do it over again, I would. And I'm here just to ask what I can do to make it right. Is there anything I can do to make this right? And the other part of the amends process that my sponsor taught me that isn't in the book, but a lot of men in Alcoholics Anonymous do it this way. He said, when we're done saying what we got to say and how we think this amends needs to go, and we've done that through communion with our Lord, we've done that through work with our sponsor, we have a very good idea of what we want to do. But there's a problem with that. Once again, I've talked to you about how our disease resides mainly in our mind. Our book tells us that. So I'm using my mind to do a lot of things through the process of the steps. I'm using my memory of things to write my inventory, my recollection, my perception, to share that in a 5th step. My information that comes out of 6 and 7 will be very accurate based on the information's accuracy in 4 and 5. But if the information in 4 and 5 isn't accurate due to my perception being wrong, I might have a problem when I go to the amends, because I'm going to decide how I've hurt you and where I've missed the mark. And one of the character defects that I discovered through the inventory process that has dogged me every step of my way in my sobriety is I have gotten to the point in Alcoholics Anonymous that through the 10-step and 11-step inventories, I will see my part in things very quickly. And I will take responsibility for it. And I will say things like, I was wrong. But there's something attached to that because of my ego and because of my wants, my fears, and my desires, which is, I know how much I hurt you. I also know intuitively how mad you should be. And I also know how long you should be mad. And I don't have to put a lot of effort into that. That stuff seems to happen naturally for me. So in these amends process, I was asked to add something. I was asked to ask them how I had hurt them, to give them the opportunity to talk to me. And I was taught not to do it in a manner like, hey, if you got anything to say, I'd be willing to listen to it. I was taught to say, and I know I've just laid this on you, and I know you didn't really expect all of this, and I'd like you to have the opportunity to think about it, and I'd like to have the opportunity to come back and speak with you again. And I'd like you to think about this, how I hurt you, and what I can do to make it right. Because you may not be able to answer that. You may need some time to think about it, and I respect that. But I really need to know how I affected you. This is only my perception of what happened. I'd love to hear your side of the story. And I did that with all my family members, and I did that with all my intimate relationships. And an amazing thing happened. I went back, and I'm pretty sure I know how I hurt these people. And you know what I found out? I was wrong. It wasn't that the information I had was inaccurate, but it didn't go far enough. I remember sitting with my older sister and talking about to her when I made the amends, and I stole their cars and I stole their money, and I missed the graduations and I missed the birthdays, and I was just an absentee family member sometimes, and I would take years off from the family, and was pretty sure that that's how I had hurt them. And my sister sat down, and we were going to do this part where she was going to tell me her side of things, and she said, you don't know, you can't imagine. You can't imagine what it's like to love somebody as much as I love you and to watch you die by inches year after year after year. You can't imagine the pain. You can't imagine the phone ringing after 11 p.m. on any night knowing that it's somebody calling about you, that you're dead. You can't imagine. You can't imagine asking you how you're doing and seeing that your life's running out your sleeves, seeing that you're dying from your drinking, yet you smile through glazed eyes and you say life couldn't be better. You can't imagine what that did to me. To know that I couldn't help you and to keep trying and to have that hope that maybe you were going to turn it around, wanting to believe the things that you were telling us, knowing it wasn't true, but needing to believe it just so we didn't give up on you. You can't imagine. And through the amends process, what I started to get in touch with is the family nature of the disease of alcoholism. Because I'm a guy that came to Alcoholics Anonymous singing a very familiar song, I didn't hurt anybody but myself. And through the inventory process in 6 and 7, I got in touch with what was wrong with me, but it was a very self-centered look at things. It was a very individual look at things. And it gave me great information, and I digested large chunks of truth about myself. But it was an inadequate picture of the damage I had done. And the holes in the picture of the damage I had done could only be filled in by the people I had hurt. Because they received it. And they felt the pain. The truth of the matter is, for many years, why I participated in this kind of behavior in the lives of people that had the misfortune of caring about me, I was anesthetized. I didn't feel it. I wanted to care about you, but I can't serve two masters. And I was serving King Alcohol. And why I'm sure I'm hurting you somewhat, get over it. And that was my attitude why this was going on. Alcohol is an insulator again between us and humanity. I don't have to feel what I don't want to feel. I don't have to care about things that normal people care about. In a sober state, I have tremendous emotions, tremendous feeling. One of the things I loved about alcohol is I didn't have to feel. I didn't have to care. It transports me to the land of I don't care. And now in a sober state, I don't have an accurate recollection of the damage I was doing in those days because I wasn't there to the degree that the recipient of my behavior was. And so through this process of the amends and being able to ask these questions, I got insight into really what I had done, which makes it more palatable and more personal and more important to do the work necessary to repair these relationships. An example of that is with this very same older sister years later in sobriety and I'll tell you a little story about sponsorship and amends. Long before I made the formal amends, I got sober in my sister's house, in the same house I finished my drinking in. And I was sober about 5-6 months, and my sponsor came up to me and said, "What are you doing to be of service to that family you're mooching that room off of?" I said, "I'm not mooching a room. I'm paying $300 a month rent, And he goes, "Well, what are you doing?" I go, "Well, I'm staying sober." He says, "Well, that's mighty big of you." And he goes, "What are you doing for them?" Well, I don't know. I'm being a good guy. Now, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go to your sister and say, "You know what? I can't tell you how much I appreciate you letting me get sober in your house after all you've been through with me. I just can't tell you. But talk is cheap. Why don't you tell me something I can do for you? Just pick something. I'd be more than happy to do it." Go say that to her. Sounded pretty innocent, didn't it? So I go to my sweet sister who loves me more than anything in the world, and I say this very spiritual sounding thing, and she didn't miss it. She thinks for about 5 seconds. She goes, "Well, you could paint my house." And I said, "Your whole house?" So I say to her, I go, "Okay, well, I've got to talk to my sponsor." Because suddenly I'm big on talking to my sponsor before I do anything. So I go to my sponsor because it's an absolutely insane request. She lives in a 2-story, 3,800 square foot house. It's just nuts, right? I'm going to paint that. So I go to my sponsor. I go, "Can you believe this? You steal their car a couple of times and they think they own you, And I go, "She wants me to paint her whole house." And my sponsor doesn't miss a beat. He goes, "Is she buying the paint?" And I go, "Well, I assume she is." He goes, "Huh, you got off easy. Paint her house." And I painted her house, in my spare time, on weekends and everything. So I go into this process completely resentful. I hate my sponsor. I hate my sister that's using me for slave labor. I hate Alcoholics Anonymous and these stupid actions you have to take. Where's painting the house in the big book? That's my question. Made a direct amends, painted their houses, tuned up their vehicles, mowed their lawns. And the funniest thing happened. This thing that I thought I was doing for my sister, every day that I worked on that, when I got done with the day's work on a Saturday and a Sunday, and cleaned up and went to my meeting, I felt good. And there was a lot of tension between me and my sister, and a lot of it had gotten repaired early in my sobriety just by being sober and talking to her about the program and her seeing the change in me. But I'm going to tell you, painting that house healed us in a way that I couldn't believe. It really did. And it's interesting to think about the part of the amends that I think sometimes we miss. And I certainly would love to miss it. I got to tell you, it's the part that I don't like. As bad as it is to go to a person, maybe a former enemy or a family member, you just feel terrible about the way they treated them, or somebody you had a sweet relationship with that you're a dog in, as hard as it is to go there and admit your fault in it, it's even harder, I think, for some of us to really dig deep and do the work. It's hard because we know it's going to be inconvenient. It's going to be inconvenient to sit down and really stress to the person the importance that they feel free, and you want them to let you know how you can make this right. I think we glance over that sometimes. I know the guys that I sponsor do, and I'm really clear with this, and I've had guys go back and make sure that the family understood, and the family came up with something when they came back the second time. And the reason I bring this up, is this martyrdom? Is this that we've been bad boys and we have to go get a spanking? We got to go paint a house. All I know is this. All my life, society has set out a set of rules. Life has set out a set of rules. Relationships set out a set of rules. And when I have made mistakes in my life, people have been understanding. They've been compassionate. And in society, in the law, in all these different, they've always given me an opportunity to clean it up, to make it right. And I just never followed through on that stuff. And in Alcoholics Anonymous this time, I started to follow through. I started to follow through in society. I started to follow through with the family. You know, a mumbling apology in the family situation isn't going to pay the bill. It says that we have to take the lead. We may have to be the example in these areas. And we have to have a sincere desire to take whatever actions we have to take to heal them also. That's part of our responsibility as sober men, is to take responsibility for what we did. And that's why I need a sponsor in this situation, because I don't know what's reasonable and what's unreasonable. Because I will think most anything you ask me to do on your behalf, I know what I did was pretty bad, but come on. I will think it's an unreasonable request. And my experience has been that these unreasonable requests that people have made of me in my amends process to make things right have served nobody better than myself. There's been great healing in my family. There's been great healing in my relationships. There's been great healing in the world that I live in, because I walk a free man today because of the amends process. But it's funny. You know why I pay my taxes every year without fail, and I look forward to doing it, and I'm never late, and I've never filed an extension, and I keep good records? Because I paid the IRS back 80 grand, and I never want to do it again. And when you're 2 years sober and you're in the amends process and you call up the IRS and you say, yes, I'd like to make arrangements to pay you back the money I owe you, and you enter into a payment agreement of $100 a month, and you're making $7.50 an hour with taxes taken out, and you write that first check to the IRS, and you think to yourself, oh good, $79,900 to go. You're pretty sure it's never going to be okay. But 5 years later, when because you've made the amends in Alcoholics Anonymous, including the financial amends, and you've gotten married to a woman that you love, and she's cleaned up her wreckage, and you call up the IRS to find out how much you owe them, because you're thinking about doing something crazy in sobriety that losers at the game of life and failures aren't supposed to be able to do. They're not supposed to be married. They're not supposed to be in love. They're not supposed to be active members of society who vote and pay taxes and pay back the money, you know. And you got good stuff going on in your life, and you call up the IRS, and for God's sakes, you have your own agent. You know, you got his extension because you talk to him all the time over the years. And you call up Bill, and you go, hi, Bill, it's Don. Hey, Don, how you doing? Good, Bill. How are the kids? How are the kids, Bill? Oh, growing like weeds. What can we do for you, Don? Hey, I just wanted to check my balance, you know. And okie dokie, Don. It'll be a minute. Gets back on the phone and says, hey, strangest thing, Don. What's that, Bill? Well, you've actually paid us off. You've actually overpaid by $400. Would you like us to send you a check? Let me tell you. If you've sent every spare nickel you've had to the IRS for 5 straight years, this is what your answer sounds like. You bet your ass. When I asked my sponsor when I'd be okay with paying back this money, I said, when's this going to be okay? He said, I don't know, Don, someday. I called my sponsor up that day. I said, hey! And some amends are like that, particularly the financial amends. But I didn't pay the money back because I owe the IRS the money. I'm not that moral, please. They got plenty of money, for God's sakes. Why do they need my money? That's the kind of head I have. I paid back the money because I didn't want to drink. What does that have to do with drinking? Everything. After the second step, it says, I'm going to be reborn. And I talked to you about having to kill off old Don. Old Don doesn't pay that money back. But when I close my eyes and I try to carry a vision of God's will into all my activities, what do I see? I see a guy that doesn't shirk from responsibility. Oh, I don't want to be that guy. You know, in Alcoholics Anonymous early on, as I got in touch with the principles of this program and read the book, A lot of the stuff that came at me, I thought to myself, oh no, I don't want this to be the answer. It's like when you read the 9th step for the first time, you go, they can't be serious. Like everybody? I got to tell you, if I knew I had to pay the money back, I probably wouldn't have stolen as much. And that's the truth of the matter, you know? It was very important for me to make a surrender in the amends process because of the amount of amends I had to make. And everybody's amends are the worst amends in the world. They're the worst amends in the world because they're yours. So don't feel unique. They're horrible. You don't understand. You don't know what I did. How can I ever make this right? We all feel that way. Every one of us. High bottom, low bottom, little money, lot of money, doesn't matter. If you owe the IRS $1,500, I guarantee you it pisses you off paying it back as much as mine. I just did it for longer. That's all. It's the same principle. That was very helpful to me, and my sponsor told me early on, he goes, oh, don't worry, Don. They don't want your money. I went, oh, that's great. He goes, they want their money. But what I did is I made a surrender. And it's an interesting surrender. If you make peace with the fact in Alcoholics Anonymous as you go through these steps that you don't care what happens as long as you get to stay sober. See, that's the surrender I made. I didn't care. I didn't care whether I had the money. I didn't care if it was ever okay. I didn't care if I ever had a big life or the right woman or any of this stuff. I didn't care. I just didn't want to live the way I'd been living. I took a chance. I stepped out on faith. The catch-22 of Alcoholics Anonymous has always been you don't get it until you do it. And until you do it, it doesn't make any sense. How many times as sponsors of men have we been talking about sharing our experience? These aren't fairy tales. These are things that have happened to us. And you know they don't believe you. How many times have we talked about the book and we're going through the book with a guy and you know that they want to believe it, but they don't. And we know the truth. We didn't believe it either until we did it. I didn't believe that going back and making things right with people I had hurt to the degree that I had hurt them was going to change my life. I thought it was going to be a horrible experience. It's the most important experience of my life was being able to show up in those living rooms, in those offices, and in those financial institutions and stand up as a man for the first time in my life and take the heat and not shirk at anything. But I didn't do it for them. I did it for myself and my God. I wanted to be closer to God. I wanted to stay sober. I wanted to stay away from a drink one day at a time. And I'd been in Alcoholics Anonymous long enough and had heard enough men say, I made a good beginning in Alcoholics Anonymous. I wrote an inventory. I did 6 and 7, but I didn't make amends, and I eventually got drunk. I had heard enough men say that. I had also heard a guy talk about coming to Alcoholics Anonymous, making his emotional amends, not making his financial amends. And at 10 years sober, he was a big shot in the movie industry, and the IRS showed up. And they took the house, they took the boat, they took everything. And he said that now he was about 16 years sober, and he'd cleaned all that stuff up. And he goes, I know today that I say, thank God for the IRS. Thank God for every bad thing that happened to me at 10 years sober, because those things had to happen for the new life to be possible. And I heard that man share. And that's why we share our experience, strength, and hope. I heard that when I was new, and what I heard is I didn't want that to happen to me. And I took the heat and I did what I had to do to get out of it. And I made that surrender like it wasn't about money anymore. Now, here's the funny thing about making the amends, too. And a lot of the step work in Alcoholics Anonymous. I thought that I would have to get through all my amends to have some kind of spiritual reward or to feel better about things. But the truth of the matter is the minute I started into the process with a sincere desire to work through these amends one at a time and clean them up, I entered a state of grace. There was a tremendous amount of fear and anxiety associated with that 8-step list that I hadn't taken action on yet. Tremendous amount of fear and anxiety. When I thought of these things, they kept me up at night. I'd break into a sweat. I would actually start to shake. I would feel anxiety coming up in me when I thought of certain individuals and thought, how can I go to them? And long before I went to some of those people, when I started the process of the amends in the 9th step, and actually started doing some of these things, it's almost like God came in and threw his arms around me and said, don't stop, you're going to be fine. And the fear went away. And my life didn't get better and things didn't change. You know, when you start off with the IRS and some of these other institutions, you know, you feel like, well, good, I've made a commitment to be broke for the rest of my life. Good move, AA. But the truth is, I entered into a period of grace with these things. Bottom of page 82. The alcoholic is like a tornado roaring his way through the lives of others. Hearts are broken, sweet relationships are dead, affections have been uprooted, selfish and inconsiderate habits have kept the home in turmoil. We feel a man is unthinking when he says sobriety is enough. He's like the farmer who came out of his cyclone cellar to find his home ruined. To his wife he remarked, "Don't see anything wrong the matter here, Ma. Ain't it grand the wind stopped blowing?" Yes, there is a long period of reconstruction ahead. We must take the lead. A remorseful mumbling that we are sorry won't fill the bill. We ought to sit down with the family and frankly analyze the past as we now see it, being very careful not to criticize them. Their defects may be glaring, but the chances are that our own actions are partly responsible. So we clean house with the family, asking each morning in meditation that our Creator show us the way of patience, tolerance, kindliness, and love. The spiritual life is not a theory. We have to live it. Unless one's family expresses a desire to live upon spiritual principles, we think we ought not to urge them. We should not talk incessantly to them about spiritual matters. They will change in time. Our own behavior will convince them more than our words. We must remember that 10 or 20 years of drunkenness would make a skeptic out of anyone. Bottom of page 83 starts the promises associated with the 9th step. And these are the promises that everybody's most familiar with in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm not going to read them this morning. I want to, because of limited time, I want to get right into the 10th step. One of the things I will say, and I know everybody's familiar with the 9th step promises, is that once again, keep in mind the big book is full of promises. There's promises with every step, and the thing to keep in mind with them is don't ever feel like if you've worked a step, and you don't get all those promises right away, that they're not on the way. Everything's incremental here. Everything is more of a metamorphosis. Change happens slowly. I like to say that since I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, my life changes about this much every day. The gap between my fingers is so small you can't really see it unless you're staring right at it. But I'll tell you what, you take those little slivers of change and you pile them on top one day at a time. There's tremendous change possible here. And the two words that are most important to keep in mind about this thing that we call change in Alcoholics Anonymous are consistency and momentum. If we're consistent in our programs, it means that we don't have to be terrific. We don't have to try to do everything, 1 weekend a month I get really spiritual, or 1 day a month I get really spiritual. This is something that if we do irreducible minimums of effort at, even something that you couldn't make any smaller if you wanted to, but if you do it every day, it's better than a big bang once in a while. That consistency and momentum will keep you moving in the right direction. Alcoholics, in my opinion, are momentum-based people, but keep in mind, momentum runs in two directions. And everybody knows what that feels like, to get off the beam a little bit, get a little stuck in the mud, get a little sloppy with our step work, a little sloppy with our prayer and meditation. We might even go to a thing like this, and we hear what we need to hear, and we share with men, and we can feel it. I can't wait to get down home. I'm going to get all fired up. And you may find it difficult when you get down the hill or get to where you're going. If you're in that place, and you've heard what you want, and you say, I'm going to do this, this, and this, don't be surprised if it doesn't happen as easily as mentally you feel it should because of the emotions that you're carrying with you. And don't be discouraged. Momentum for alcoholics is a boulder. And when it's going in the wrong direction, you first have to stop it. And then you've got to get it going in the other direction. And there's that period there where I'm telling you, it doesn't feel like anything's happening except exertion. Trying to catch it and slow it down and ride it and get it going in the right direction. It just feels like exertion. It doesn't feel like movement. Trust me, something's going on if you're taking the actions. And once we get momentum going as alcoholics and we get into that lockstep, prayer, meditation, working with others, attending meetings, helping others with their work, and things like all these things that we learn here, if we start doing it consistently, we get that positive momentum going. And what happens? And we've all experienced this. And I heard old timers talk about this when I was new. I didn't know what they meant. They said at some point the program started working. I used to work the program, and then the program started working me. I love it when the program works me And what I mean by that is there's a non-negotiability about the things that I do in my life. I don't really think about them. Do I want to pray? Do I not want to pray? Do I want to go to a meeting? Do I not want to go to a meeting? The negotiation in recovery or anything else in your life is what makes it difficult. I've never had a problem doing anything in my life. What makes doing dishes, dirty dishes, difficult? Negotiation. Doing dishes isn't tough. Once your hands are in the warm, soapy water, they almost wash themselves, don't they? But boy, getting your hands in that warm, soapy water is tough. Look at that pile of dirty dishes. Well, I don't want to do that. Negotiation. Once we start doing these things and we get some positive momentum going, the negotiation slows down and Alcoholics Anonymous starts to work us. Instead of it's what I want to do, it's what I owe, it's just what I do. It's just what I do. I don't really think a lot about it. It's Monday, this is where I'm at. It's Tuesday, this is where I'm at. It's morning, this is what I do upon awakening. It's just what I do. And that's a wonderful place to be when it's seeming like that effort of slowing down that negative momentum and changing the boulder to positive momentum, when that effort gets removed from the process and you feel like a little kid with this big boulder skipping down the broad highway with a stick and you're just keeping the boulder rolling. Don't let it stop, baby. It's awfully heavy. This brings us to step 10, which suggests we continue to take personal inventory and continue to set right any new mistakes as we go along. We vigorously commenced this way of living as we cleaned up the past. We have entered the world of the Spirit. Our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. This is not an overnight matter. It should continue for our lifetime. Continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. When these crop up, we ask God at once to remove them. We discuss them with somebody immediately and make amends quickly if we have harmed anyone. Then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. Love and tolerance of others is our code. The principle at work in step 10 is maintenance. A couple of things about step 10 to keep in mind. In Alcoholics Anonymous, it's pretty common that people talk about taking their 10th step at night. It's important that you understand that you don't have to take your 10th step at night. In fact, the book doesn't say anything about taking your 10th step at night. That's the 11-step inventory. What the 10th step says is we're going to continue to watch for these things, okay? We're going to continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, self-seeking, fear, all these things. And it says when these crop up, and there's not a time associated with that. It says when these things crop up, we start dealing with them. So keep that in mind. When I talked earlier about the compartmentalization of the steps and how when we go through them for the first time, there seems to be clear walls between the steps, it's very important, I'm not going to tell anybody how to sponsor their guys, but I'll share with you how I take guys through the steps. You make your 8-step list, and you do that in coordination with a meeting about making your first amends. Make the 8-step list. We're going to make amends. We're going to have a conversation, and we're going to get kicked out into that realm of the Spirit to go and make that amends. We're going to get our feet wet. We're not going to think about it too long. But we immediately, upon the evening after the 5th step, we start doing a 10th step. Now, and the book doesn't say that specifically, but it says that when it says we continue to take personal inventory. Keep in mind the 10th step is nothing more than an extension of the inventory process we've already become familiar with, because the very things that we're looking for in the inventory process we're looking for in the 10th step. And we're using the same principles in them. So it's important that we don't let somebody, and it's tough for the guys, because in Alcoholics Anonymous, they're going to go to a lot of open meetings, they're going to go to a lot of discussion meetings, they're going to hear a lot about the 5th step. And the 5th step gets presented as a finish line. And it's not. It's really a starting point. So if we're not careful with the guys that we work with before we get to the step work, to this point in the steps, we may discourage them. They may feel like we pulled the wool over their eyes or the rug out from under their feet. They need to understand the nature of the steps, and that step 10 is going to start right after the 5th step, because we're going to continue this process for our lifetime. And this is the format we use to see how we're doing spiritually. So we want them to understand that we need to start doing this because our life does not go into neutral while we go into 6, 7, 8, and 9. Don't worry. Life understands that you've got some amends to make. It will not throw anything at you until you complete that process, and then you can start to take personal inventory. And a lot of us can get in a lot of trouble between those two events if we actually think, and some men take, 6 months, 7 months, a year. Sometimes the amends process takes, I made an amends that took me 16 years to make, not because of lack of willingness, but because I couldn't find the person. So some of these amends take a great deal of time to make. So if you're going to wait till all your amends are done to do your 10-step, you may be in a wee bit of trouble. So what's the timeline for starting to do a 10-step? The book says we continue to take personal inventory. When we're wrong, promptly admitted it. The timeline is right after your 5th step. So keep that in mind. And that's under the assumption that you're doing your 5th step immediately after you finish your 4th step too. Because I'm not quite sure what that sitting on your 4th step thing's all about, or my sponsor can't see me for 2 months. I would have shot myself in the head. God, I don't know how you make that wait. Okay, so the big word in here that we want to keep in mind is we're going to continue. We're going to continue to take inventory, we're going to continue to make amends, and we're going to continue to help others. These are things we're going to continue to do, and that's in the 10th step. Because we're not going to look at these things in the 10th step and go, well, it's progress, not perfection. Guess I missed the mark on that one. We're going to look for these things. We're going to figure out if we owe an amends. We're going to take care of that. We're going to talk to our sponsor, and we're going to turn our thoughts to somebody that we can help. So we're going to continue these things, and then we're going to continue them for our lifetimes. It's not an overnight matter, as the book says. Now, something that's interesting here that I want you to keep in mind, and this is really kind of my favorite stuff. Okay. Silkworth talked about an entire psychic change in the doctor's opinion. It said there was little chance for our recovery unless we have an entire psychic change. When does that occur? The book tells us that it occurs sometime after the 9th step or in the process of the 9th step as we start to do our 10th step. And the idea when Bill wrote these steps is that he didn't, Bill could have never imagined that it was going to take people a year to go through the steps or 2 years to go through the steps. He could have never imagined because that's not how they were doing it in the beginning. They were going through them very quickly. And they were going through them very quickly because they thought you could die if you don't get through them very quickly. We're not going to postpone or evade. We're just going to get through this stuff as quickly as possible. Why? Because we have to get to a spiritual awakening. Why? Because that's the only thing that will keep us from drinking ourselves to death. So the idea that there's so much time between those steps never occurred to Bill when he wrote that wasn't the way it was set up, that they were done very quickly. Understanding that the idea is to lead somebody to the power that will solve all problem, and that's God. And the steps are what lead us to Him. So Silkworth, who understood that it was essential to have a spiritual awakening, the first 9 steps of recovery are designed for that to occur. And what it says after the 9th step, and one of probably the biggest promise in the book, it says we're seldom interested in alcohol, for by this time sanity would have returned. If tempted, we recoil as from a hot flame. This new attitude seems to have been freely given to us. We're placed in a position of safety and neutrality. It's not that we're fighting or that we're cocky. It's as though the problem has been removed. And we find that we get to keep this new attitude as long as we fulfill a few simple requirements. So it's important for you to know that when you get to this point and you're waiting for the spiritual awakening, the spiritual experience, you've probably already had it. How do you know that you possibly have had it? Well, I don't feel like I've had it. If you've gotten through the first 9 steps of recovery, if you've done them honestly, if you've left nothing out, if you've made a sincere desire to go in a helpful, concerted manner to the people that you've damaged to clean up that wreckage of your past, you could not have done those things without God. You don't have the power. The very fact that you've come that far in the process is evident that God is now in your life and you've had that spiritual awakening. And that's good news for us. Because it's Silkworth and Bill and all the men and women of Alcoholics Anonymous that came before us and their experience tells us that without the spiritual awakening, there's no hope for long-term sobriety. So by the time you get to the 9th step, what you're looking for, not only are you looking with it, it's here. On page 84, you find the 10-step promises. And we've ceased fighting anything or anybody for even alcohol, for by now sanity would have returned. We will seldom be interested in liquor. If tempted, we recoil as from a hot flame. We react sanely and normally, and we will find this has happened automatically. We will see that our new attitude towards liquor has been given us with any thought or effort on our part. It just comes. This is the miracle of it. We are not fighting it, neither are we avoiding temptation. We feel as though we've been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. We have not even sworn off. Instead, the problem has been removed. It does not exist for us. We are neither cocky nor we are afraid. That is our experience. Now the warning, this is how we react as long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. How do we keep in fit spiritual condition? Taking a daily inventory. It is our process in Alcoholics Anonymous. It is our format as men in recovery. This is one of the ways my sponsor explained to me, and I liked it. He goes, look, it's just what we do. Now, that's what we do. I don't know what you're going to do. That's what we do, Don. If you want to stay sober, you may want to do what we do. And that's how we maintain our spiritual condition. We do a daily inventory. We don't put on robes and go to a field. We don't read outside spiritual literature, although all these things some of us do. We don't meditate the Buddha, but some of us do. All these things are fine, but the format in Alcoholics Anonymous for maintaining your spiritual condition so you can enjoy that daily reprieve is doing a daily inventory. And we just need to be clear on what Alcoholics Anonymous says that we need to do. And I think it's great. The fun thing about staying in the format or the boundaries of Alcoholics Anonymous in terms of what they teach us to do is once we do those things and we stay consistent with them and we get the momentum going, these other spiritual endeavors, because AA is very clear that we have no monopoly on spirituality. And it's through Alcoholics Anonymous, that process has kept me open-minded. And I love the fact that I have so many men in my life that have different forms of spirituality in their life, and we share and we banter. And because of that daily reprieve, which is taken care of my daily inventory, one of the things in my daily inventory is going to look at is how open-minded I am. What kind of relationships I'm having with other people. Am I in conflict with people? So these things all make it possible for me to be actually more open-minded on other spiritual matters by being very structured about how I approach my daily living and make sure that daily inventory is involved in there. We're going to move on to step 11. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. The principle behind step 11 is making contact. Step 11 suggests prayer and meditation. We shouldn't be shy on this matter of prayer. Better men than us are using it constantly. It works. And of course, the warning, if we have the proper attitude and work at it. It would be easy to be vague about this matter, yet we believe we can make some definite and valuable suggestions. There's two basic inventories in the 11th step that they suggest. First one listed on page 86 is about the evening. It says, when we retire at night, we constructively review our day. So what does that mean? I guess it means I don't get to beat myself up. I guess it means I get to look at it with an open mind. So before I even start reviewing, they're giving me some directions on how I'm going to review. And the first word listed in the directions is I'm going to constructively review my day. So I'm given an idea, I'm given a tip on the kind of attitude I should bring into this. And it's going to ask me the same questions that I'm asked in the 10-step inventory. Were we resentful, selfish, dishonest, or afraid? Which is basically an extension of step 4. Do we owe an apology? Extension of steps 8 and 9. Have we kept something to ourselves that should be discussed with another person at once? Extension of step 5. Were we kind and loving towards all? What could we have done better? Were we thinking of ourselves most of the time? Or were we thinking of what we could do for others, what we could pack into the stream of life? But we must be careful not to drift into worry, remorse, or morbid reflection, for that would diminish our usefulness to others. After making our review, we ask God's forgiveness and inquire what corrective measures should be taken. The big difference between the 10-step inventory and the 11-step inventory, and a lot of people do their 10-step at night, like I said, but the book says that what we're going to use the 10-step for is our daily living. When these things crop up, we deal with them immediately. Whereas the 11-step is saying that we're going to do this at night every night, because you may have to do 10 steps, and you probably started to do this when you were very new. Most of us have stories about being new and not having answers, being all freaked out, having to go in the bathroom and get on our knees and pray. I just had to get out of there and get on my knees and pray. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't get a hold of my sponsor. That's a form of a 10-step. Something cropped up pretty good, didn't it? Didn't know what to do, so you didn't do anything, and you prayed. That's a great 10-step. You know, I don't want to ever become so advanced in Alcoholics Anonymous that I don't think I can run scared into a bathroom and get on my knees and say the Serenity Prayer 3 or 4 times. I do that today. I do the stuff I learned early in Alcoholics Anonymous, not because I'm afraid of advancement, because the stuff they taught me in the beginning, they gave me the good stuff early. They gave me the answers early, and that stuff really works. So you're probably more familiar with the idea of doing a 10-step during your day than you realize. But the 10-step is designed to be used at any time during the day. And the 11-step inventory, we're going to do every night. But there's an important distinction, because when you first look at them, we seem to be looking for the same things. We're looking for dishonesty. We're looking for fear. We're looking for self-seeking motives. We're looking for all these things. But the difference is what we do with it. You know, in the 10-step inventory, it asks us a question, you know, do we owe an amends? Do we need to talk to somebody? If we do, we need to talk to somebody immediately. And then it gives us some directions. You know, we turn our thoughts immediately to somebody we can help. Those are the directions. In the 11th step, the directions are a little bit different. When we ask those questions and we find out that maybe we've missed the mark, the directions are we go to God and we ask God's forgiveness. That's the first direction. That's different, because this is what my problem is. You see, in the 10th step, what I'll do is I'll look at it, I'll figure out what I've done wrong, how I've hurt them, how much I've hurt them, how long they should be mad, what I need to do to make it right. I'll go talk to my sponsor, and hopefully I won't take action based on that alone. Because what we're doing here is we're bringing in prayer and meditation into our daily inventory process. When you ask God's forgiveness, and then the second question is, and inquire what corrective measures should be taken, that's all done with God. The inquiring of what corrective measures should be taken is with God. It's not with a sponsor. It's not with your friends. It's not with your ego. The 10th step says we go to talk to someone immediately, the someone being a human being. We ask God's forgiveness and inquire what corrective measures should be taken. We're talking to God. So we're going to bring our sponsor in it in the 10th step. We're going to bring God in it in the 11th step inventory. And between the three of us, maybe we won't have to drink today. Maybe we can go stay in the game. Maybe we can watch for these things as they crop up. Because it's very important that through this process, we're going to start to develop what the book refers to as a vital sixth sense. A feeling that in the beginning we're going to make a lot of mistakes and we're going to be really confused when we try to access God and we start to do our 11-step work, and we're going to pray only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. And how can I tell it's God's will? I'm so confused. All these things that go on when we really start trying to do an 11th step. What's our format? It's the 11-step inventory process, because we're going to bring God into our daily living when we review our day. And when we make mistakes and we miss the mark, we're not going to beat ourselves up, because we're doing this constructively. We are going to live along spiritual lines. We are going to settle for spiritual perfection. We are not saints. We understand this. So we're going to go to God and we're going to say, sorry. I got it. I know, and you know, you don't want me to live this way. What do you think I should do to make this right? We pray about it. And we listen. And we'll get an answer. And then to make sure that our self-will hasn't dressed up in religious clothing, Because most of the letters I get from God, the handwriting looks strikingly familiar. We will go to our sponsor and we'll say, I had a little prayer and meditation after my 11-step inventory, and this is what I found out, and this is what I think I should do. And if you've been at this a long time, usually your sponsor will go, well, it sounds like you've really thought this through, go ahead and do it. But about 10% of the time, he'll say, so, did you think of this on your own, or did you have outside help?